the book is written for the Palestine movement. It is not a book trying to convince Christian Zionists to stop being Christian Zionists. It's not trying to convince white privileged Westerners to see us as humans. This is a book for the movement in Palestine abroad that wants to see a free, a liberated, an equal Palestine for all groups of people. So it's trying to address the movement itself. And therefore the questions, I think, are very different compared to many other Palestinian theological books.
Hey friends, this is Jen, and this episode is part of the Across the Divide book club series. And in this conversation, I chat with John Munayer and Samuel Munayer about their book, The Cross and the Olive Tree: Cultivating Palestinian Theology Amid Gaza. As you might know, this series is associated with a one-of-a-kind, unique, fun book club with our Patreon supporters. So if you've thought about supporting us before, or maybe you already do, then join us for our book club conversation on this book at the end of the month, November 2025. And if you don't yet support us, check us out, patreon.com/Across the Divide podcast. In addition to having access and ability to participate in the book club, there's all kinds of other exclusive features and extra cuts from episodes that we offer to our supporters. You can support us for as little as $1 a month, and you move our work forward in really important ways. Thank you to all of you who have been doing this for some time. This conversation with John and Sam is really special in a lot of ways. And this book is not just written by them, but is an edited volume that includes contributions from a number of folks that we have had on the podcast in the last 2 years. It includes contributions from Yusuf El-Khouri, Mara Sarji, Asmira Hamuri Davis, Lama Mansour, Daniel Munayer, Shadia Kupti, and John Munayer and Samuel Munayer. The chapters in this book offer really unique explorations into developing communal and localized Palestinian theology of liberation, and in particular, growing them from the context and ongoing genocide in Gaza. The symbol of the olive tree and olive oil in particular is this really beautiful paradigm that we talk about a lot in our conversation today, for doing theology in community, in costly ways and in ways that require a witness that is ultimately for liberation and faith, and a sort of discipleship call. So in this conversation as well, there's some really important insights that John and Sam share about their process of writing this book and of what they hope that it invites us into as readers. John Munayer is a Palestinian theologian from Jerusalem and holds degrees from King's College London, the University of Edinburgh, and VU University Amsterdam. John's currently involved in interreligious activism and is the founder and editor of the Journal of Palestinian Christianity at Bethlehem Bible College. He's a PhD candidate at the University of Edinburgh, researching the political theology of the Palestinian laity in relation to the Holy Fire ceremony. Samuel Munayer is a Palestinian theologian from Jerusalem and holds degrees from Durham University and Exeter University. Samuel works as an advocacy and access officer for a humanitarian organization that works in Gaza and the West Bank. He recently co-authored with John the article entitled Decolonizing Palestinian Liberation Theology: New Methods, Sources, and Voices. Friends, enjoy this conversation and join us at the end of the month for book club. We'll see you there. John and Sam Munayer, welcome to Across the Divide. It's such a joy to have you here to talk about your new book.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So today we're talking about The Cross and the Olive Tree, Cultivating Palestinian Theology Amid Gaza. This book recently came out with Orbis Books, and you all just finished up a really significant tour abroad and traveling across the U.S. and elsewhere to talk about the book, to speak with churches and other communities. So it really is such a special opportunity to have you here on the podcast, and then for us as a community to also be reading your book, and we'll be discussing it with the podcast community later this month. As we start out, I'm wondering if you both could reflect on what led to you both working on this book together, and maybe sharing with us some of the conversations and decisions that went into shaping it how you did as an edited volume, curating the group of contributors and authors that you did. How did this come about and take shape in the way that it did?
Yeah, so Sam and I write and research theology together as brothers. This is something we did for, since probably 2022. And we had a project in mind before the genocide started. But after the genocide, took place, we thought that it wasn't responsible for us to continue with our original project, but that we needed to address theologically the genocide itself. And this is when we decided to write about what was happening in Gaza, but also not to do it alone. Because of the weight of the subject and the reality that we live in. And this is when we approached a bunch of different Palestinian theologians within our circles, and specifically those who are sort of part of this new wave of Palestinian theologians, those who are kind of in the beginning of their theological journey. So this is when we managed to get together 8 different contributors, including Sam and myself, 4 men and 4 women, all trying to engage with the genocide in different ways. And we're trying to sort of mimic the olive harvest itself, which kind of speaks to the title, which we do as community. So theology should be done in community, and that's sort of what we're trying to do in this book.
That's beautiful. I'm wondering if you want to just say something brief about the title and the framing of the book. I mean, we'll get into sort of like how theology is centered around the olive tree and olive oil in particular. But what some of our listeners might not know is that you're playing off of the title of another great theological work, The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James Cone, very, very important work in Black liberation theology. What's the connection there for you both?
So, whilst we do kind of give a wink to James Cone, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and we invoke the cross and the olive tree in a way that is also dialectically 2 symbols that interpret one another. So, in James Cone's work, the cross and the lynching tree is explored by saying that you cannot understand the crucifixion of Jesus, the cross, in North America in the 20th and 21st century without seeing it through the eyes of a lynching victim, through the experience of a lynching victim. And in that way, the lynching tree and the cross interpret one another. And we do the same kind of theological interpretation of the cross and the olive tree. So the olive tree is a symbol of Palestine. It's the symbol of our indigeneity rooted in the land. It also expresses our sumud, our resilience. You know, when we think about the word sumud, usually it's illustrated by the olive tree that withstands hot weather, droughts, and more. The cross represents our faith, represents our belief in Christ. And in that sense, we're engaging with our faith and with our context and identity as Palestinians. But also, the cross represents the crucified people. So the people of Gaza, the people of the West Bank, the people of Palestine. But not only Palestine, but also the crucified people of the world, the oppressed. And in that sense, we are trying to engage with these 2 symbols, with these 2 experiences in a way that is theologically fruitful. And maybe, John, you can speak about the metaphor of the olive oil that we use to kind of introduce Palestinian theology. And the main aim here is to kind of reintroduce Palestinian theology in a way that also gives a bit more nuance and gives a broader conversation and explores new theological terrain.
Yeah, and I'll just say that this sort of idea that Palestinian theology is like an olive tree and olive oil is not new. So our previous sort of theological elders, such as Jirias Khoury, is someone who engaged in this quite extensively, but he just wrote in Arabic, so sometimes it's been less accessible to non-Arabic people who don't read Arabic. And also Yusuf Khoury, who's a contemporary theologian who's probably very familiar to a lot of the listeners, who also engaged. He wrote an article about this too. So we're trying to continue something that already exists within the Palestinian theological tradition. And in some ways, also the foreword of the book is written by two theological elders, Reverend Naimatik, Assis Naimatik, and Auntie Sider Diabes. So what we're trying to do here is also, very much continue the legacy that a lot of our theological elders have sort of, built for us, this path that we're trying to walk on. So that's sort of the idea behind also the tree, is also to communicate to something that already exists within Palestinian theology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I really appreciated that Atik and Duais talked about this in the introduction and really naming the uniqueness of what you all have sort of woven together and built here. That this is really, it feels to be a really important contribution to Palestinian theology in your very intentional centering of the voices of the new and emerging generation of Palestinian theologians, and yet rooting, as you said, deeply in a tradition and in the work of elders, but yet in some ways offering up a new oil, offering up a new sort of paradigm for engaging with, for growing Palestinian theology in a context of genocide in Gaza that has experienced in this way before.
Yeah, and there's more Palestinian theologians as well. I mean, we have 8 contributors in the book, but I think it speaks to a larger movement or group or community that are engaging very seriously with their faith and theology. And the whole idea behind the metaphor is that our context is the olive groves. The theologian is the farmer, and the theology is the olive oil that is produced. And we kind of play on that as a way to think about how we can do theology as a community, as expressed in the book, but also, which olive trees are we picking from and in which contexts? Because even in Palestine, we live in very different realities. So we need to understand that perhaps there isn't one Palestinian theology, but many Palestinian theologies. And how are these sort of, all of these olives might come from the same land, but they might taste differently. They might have different qualities to them. So that's, again, a metaphor we're kind of trying to build upon.
Yeah. Sam, please.
I think what is really intentional in the book, and within each chapter, you see the city in which the author is coming from, or the 2 cities in which they're maybe their origins are from and where they're living in now. And as John said, we wanted to express that Palestinian theology is not one set of theology, but there's theologies. And we wanted to really express the locality that we have in Palestinian theology and platform theologians and conversations that often don't get enough attention. And in that sense, we wanted to push some of the conversations within Palestinian theology and some of the understandings of Palestinian theology. And I think that's really important in the midst of genocide, when we speak about conversations of critique of empire, but also of healing and in imagining and building an alternative. And I think doing that collectively as a process was something that was very beneficial also for us as editors and as fellow theologians, is that in the process of writing this book and editing the book, we were learning from one another, and we were gathering around and actually doing theology like the olive harvest as a community. And I think that is something that was exciting and did invoke a sense of energy and theological imagination to really address conversations that seek to decolonize our situation, seek to build resilience as we are suffering. And it's something that I think is inviting broader people to join in that conversation. So we also challenge the notion of who is a theologian. Who do we invite around the table when we discuss theology? And we wanted to push back and say that there are different types of theologians, there are different types of olive oil, and different usages of olive oil, like there are different types of theologians. And I think that's really important to recognize as a community, as we're trying to, build a future, an imagination which seeks to resist empire and live in a redemptive world.
Those are some of the threads that I appreciate most, that really shine through the chapters in the book of one of this highly localized contextual theology that involves storytelling and sort of memory and retrieval. It's very rooted in the present while looking back and looking forward, and this communal aspect. That theology is to be done in community, to be shared, and that's the work of dreaming, of resistance, of reconciliation, and healing, of lament. Right, it's articulated in all of these different beautiful ways by the different contributors. I want to ask you both about the continuing in the ways that you've articulated Palestinian theology through the metaphor of the olive tree and oil in particular. You kind of articulate this Palestinian olive oil theology as one that is developed by Palestinians for Palestinians, and one that is inherently liberative. That if there aren't liberative veins and trajectories in it, that it's not Palestinian theology. And yet throughout the chapters in the book, there are these conversations of cross-cultural and transnational solidarity. And so I want to kind of pose this question to you of what's the potential of Palestinian theology as an invitation, as a form of liberation, as a learning tool for Palestinians and non-Palestinians in this moment. And in particular, when we're recording this, where we're several weeks into an agreed upon ceasefire in Gaza, and yet, maybe as it didn't come to a surprise to many of us, the Israeli regime has continued in bombing a number of areas in Gaza, and that horrific destruction and murder is still ongoing. So what's the potential? What's the invitation of a Palestinian olive oil theology in this moment?
I'll mention 2 points within the kind of potential of this way of introducing Palestinian theology. The first is the land. So when we are introducing Palestinian theology through the metaphor of olive oil, engaging with the olive tree, it's rooting ourselves within our geography, within the land, and that is a very potent source of wisdom in terms of learning about what works, what is organic to the land, and what kind of lessons we can follow the land so that we can decolonize our reality, and following the people of the land. So if olive oil and the olive trees teach us so much and inspire us theologically, then there's a lot of wisdom of people that have practiced agricultural, who are in touch with the land in which they live in, and therefore give us a lot of material to reflect on in terms of trying to navigate realities of occupation and genocide. So, for example, Yusuf Khoury talks about Teta faith, Teta theology, grandmother theology. We bringing that kind of centering of the conversation of theology with grandmothers can teach us so much in terms of how to treat one's neighbor, how to understand the teachings of the Gospels, and also ask the question: are grandmothers a part of our theological movement? Are they a part of the movement that we foster when we organize conferences, when we think about papers, when we organize meetings? Are grandmothers, are farmers, are artists a part of the conversation? And often it's only the theologians or the academics who are, which has its limitations. And therefore, that kind of rooting of Palestinian theology within land can start opening up again the conversation of who's included as a theologian and who can inspire us and can teach us. The same goes to Shadia, who looks at the connections of Turtle Island theology and Palestinian theology of land by noticing sumac in Canada, in Turtle Island, and in Palestine, and therefore connecting that kind of transnational thread, which leads to the second point, which the first point maybe was more focused on the people themselves, Palestinians, and opening up the conversation and widening the table. And the second one is that once you do that, you suddenly see other connections with indigenous people and people within the global south. So throughout the book, much of our sources and references are liberation theologians. You mentioned Cohn, but it goes far beyond that. Even Yusuf, he was inspired by the book Abualita Faith to construct his Teta faith. And that potential of connecting and drawing the threads of land within Palestine and beyond already has a political message and an imagination of what a redemptive future might look like. And Palestine is a symbol that is kind of the symbol of both oppressed people and also the symbol of empire. That's why settler colonial empires and settler colonial states are seeing Palestine as a threat. And if they see it as a threat, that it can also be a symbol of liberation. I think that's kind of the real potentials that the symbol of Palestine and doing Palestinian theology through the metaphor of land and olive oil can be really potent.
And there's sort of three core elements that run through the chapters, because the chapters are addressing different questions using different sources, and there's three common sort of themes within the chapters. The first one is the audience. I think the book is written for the Palestine movement. It is not a book trying to convince Christian Zionists to stop being Christian Zionists. It's not trying to convince white privileged Westerners to see us as humans. This is a book for the movement in Palestine abroad that wants to see a free, a liberated, an equal Palestine for all groups of people. So it's trying to address the movement itself. And therefore the questions, I think, are very different compared to many other Palestinian theological books that have very powerfully challenged sort of Western Christianity and its Zionist tendencies. And therefore, the second point that runs through the chapters is, as Sam mentions, is we're writing to sort of the wider solidarity movement, because If you're talking about Palestine, that means you're talking about colonial contexts in other places. You're talking about race. You're talking about genocide in different contexts as well. You're talking about capitalism. You're talking about many different forms of oppression that we see in other places. So in some ways, it can also offer perhaps some insight for people, for instance, if I take your context in North America, who are dealing with ICE and the rise of fascism and Christian nationalism. So it's so it's also trying to make those connections of how do we as a movement, how are we steadfast, how do we empower ourselves, how do we heal, and how do we address internal questions. And that's why it leads to the third theme or element, is that we look for theological sources that are not typically in sort of what we would consider a classical theological source, which is probably a book, right, in academia. But we have one contributor, as Sam mentions, that looks at grandmother theology. For many Palestinians, it hasn't been the theology in academia or in the churches that have sustained them during a genocide. It's been their grandmothers, or their aunties, their uncles, our children, the land itself. So in that sense, I think it's doing something that's new and I think really needed. Because when I was speaking to Palestinian students at the Bethlehem Bible College during the genocide, the question they were asking wasn't, how do I challenge Christian Zionism? They were asking, do we leave or do we stay? So And I didn't feel like there were that many necessarily theological sources for that question. So that's kind of what we're trying to do in the book.
I just got chills when you shared their question. Do we leave or do we stay? And what you both just shared is really helpful for me as I'm thinking through the kind of invitation that this book extends. You're right. Each of you in your chapters, all of the contributors, you're not making an appeal, whether it be to Western Christians or whatever other audience. There's not an appeal that's being made. And I'm thinking particularly about this question of deconstructing Zionism or humanizing Palestinians. I'm reading through Mohammed Al-Kurd's Perfect Victims right now, so I'm thinking a lot about this sort of this trap of a framework that exists around the task of sort of needing to humanize Palestinians that Palestinians are often tasked with. But in a lot of ways, I'm really struck by the invitations that each of you contributors makes to not just consider the stories and your own experiences that you weave into your theological developments, but there's an invitation for the reader to think about their own context and their own experience, their grandmothers, their community, and engage in the work of theology. So I do think there's something so beautiful here in that regard, that you're not just demonstrating or articulating contextual theology in the context of genocide and occupation and oppression, but you're offering an invitation for others to explore that for themselves.
I would also, within that kind of thread of invitation, we are also addressing a question that often doesn't get space within our movements, is what is the role of internationals within the Palestinian Christian movement, the Palestinian liberation movement. And we use, again, using the metaphor of olive picking, you have the internationals who come and do protective presence and help Palestinians pick the olives. We're seeing it right now in the West Bank, paying a heavy price, some of them. And those who represent kind of the internationals who have really helped Palestinians and Palestinian Christians, platform our voices, help us develop our theologies, benefit, from the lessons they have and from their expertise. But also there's some internationals that don't know their space or are not sensitive to the norms of olive picking, and often provoke Israeli soldiers and put Palestinians at harm. And these are the internationals that we kind of use as a metaphor with the olive picking to say the internationals that often create inner conflict within the Palestinian Christian movement, or are not sensitive to the theological field of Palestine, and then misunderstand the voices, the actors, the nuances that are in it, and therefore dilute the olive oil. And I think within that invitation that we're giving, yes, we're not appealing to the international community. And when I say international, I'm specifically speaking to the West. We're asking the West to re-examine its own role within the Palestinian theological movement. And here we're asking the people who are in solidarity with us, not the people who are on the other side, who are not allowing us to pick olives or justifying the uprooting of the olive trees. We're speaking to those who want to do protective presence for us, to do it in a way that is sensitive and healthy. So in a way, we're calling on those internationals to re-examine their way of being in solidarity with us. And in that sense, we're trying to invite the internationals who are in solidarity with us to rethink how they are going to be in solidarity with us, to help us pick olives and not pick apples, in a way to kind of use that metaphor. And I think that is a conversation that this book tries to push also, is to kind of get the international Westerners to reflect themselves and have conversations of how can we achieve the goal that we want to achieve in a way that is healthy, in a way that doesn't just accept good intentions, but actually really challenges deep reflection of solidarity.
And in that same sort of line of healthy critical questions about the movement, we're also asking ourselves Palestinians. So also in the book, there's many authors that are engaging with, how are we Palestinians sometimes not helpful in these organizing, in these movements, and can also abuse the relationship between us and other individuals, but also specifically coming from the West. So it's a question about the movement itself. It's a question for the community who are seeking liberation, peace, justice, and equality. How can we get better? Because as much as I want to critique Christian Zionists, and I do for the genocide, I also want to see about how I am not doing enough for the people of Gaza and for and for my own Palestinian brothers and sisters and relatives and friends. Right? We all have a role to play here, and we all can be part of the solution, but also part of the problem. So it's a difficult conversation, but I think it's one that we need to have, because at the end of the day, it's not about us. It's about those who are most suffering as we speak in Gaza. So it's these conversations that we're trying to evoke as a community. Yeah.
Olive trees require pruning and to be healthy, and sometimes we have to revisit the conditions of the tree so that it is fruitful. Yeah. Thank you for articulating that, both of you, in such beautiful ways. You both mentioned this earlier on in the conversation, so I want to ask you what ways you're thinking about Palestinian theology, and maybe even beyond that, maybe your faith, your relationship, your wrestling with God amid genocide in Gaza. How has it shifted, either through maybe one of the author's contributions, or how the project as a whole has evolved? In what ways have you noticed yourself growing or changing in this regard?
I think for me, since the genocide and in working with this book, the importance of community and relationship within the movement, and within that kind of spirit of community, of holding one another, learning from one another, critiquing one another in a way that's coming from love, is really something that is vital for our own survival and for our own kind of faith. And I think it's no coincidence that within the contents of the book, but within my own spirituality, I've been drawing a lot of lessons and have been growing in my faith, or trying to grow in my faith, centering the lessons from the book of Acts, where you see, Christ has ascended, the disciples are trying to transition from being disciples to apostles, they're forming the new body, and they eat in one accord, they pray in one accord, and they do things together and as a movement. And I think having those moments where we have been a movement, when we continue to be a movement, has been something where I feel the Holy Spirit is present in a way that both convicts, but also in a way that both empowers. And remembering that really the power that we have comes in pointing to Jesus of Nazareth, and not in pointing to a specific moment in time or a specific figure, but it's a movement that is reflecting and in witnessing, being a martyr to that to the King, to Jesus. And I think in that way, the value, the centrality of community, both as a strategy for our liberation, but also as one that is a necessary condition for our spirituality, has been something that has been a revelation since October 7th to now. And I think we are seeing areas where we have been really well, and we've done really well as a community, and the power that we have and the achievements we've accomplished over October 7th, but also the areas where we need more improvement. I really think that spirituality of community is something that throughout writing the book and doing theology with the contributors, but also living in Palestine amid genocide, has been something that has stood out to me.
I think also when you live in the context that we live in, certain elements of our tradition and our scripture become illuminated, in the sense that especially in the first Christmas during the genocide in 2023, that was a moment that empowered me, because I could read the Christmas story in a completely different, not a completely different way, but in new ways, that really hit me and empowered me in different ways. The Christmas story is not for everyone, and it's definitely not good news for the powerful and the rich. So, reading the Christmas story and reading other texts has really, it's allowed me in a weird sense of privilege to I think, connect with certain elements of our faith that other people who are more comfortable and privileged cannot. And this leads to the second point, is we had happened to be studying the book of Revelation before the genocide started, and we decided to continue doing it after it took place. And me and Sam were reading from Revelations chapter 6 about the martyrs who have a special place under the altar of God, who call to God asking for, how long, O Lord, right? And that hit differently because the week before, martyrs in the Orthodox Church in Gaza were killed by Israeli bombing, which we actually marked the 2 years for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. So that hit in a different way, and the entire message of the book of Revelations, if I can sum up many things of it, but at least a few, is this idea of being steadfast in our faith, in our tradition, not compromising, and not being tempted by the empire. And all of us are tempted by the empire. All of us are tempted to be part of the powerful or the comfortable. All of us sometimes compromise our faith, and we have to be real with that. But how can we as a church withstand that together and hold each other as we go through these horrible, horrible times? So this idea of sort of being true witnesses to the gospel, no matter what consequences, then led me and Sam also to write about martyrdom, because that's what we were dealing with. We have martyrs. And the students that I was engaging with were talking about martyrdom. And our family received death threats during this time too. And we had to ask ourselves very difficult questions. So engaging in martyrdom became sort of something very real for Sam and I and others. And that's why we wrote about this. And this leads to my third reflection about my own faith is, after writing that chapter, I'm questioning it, right? It's such a heavy topic that I don't know if I did justice. I think me and Sam have spoken about this between us as well, that, we wrote something very heavy, and we constantly are questioning, if A, what we wrote is good and correct, and B, whether we even live that life that we write. And I think this is why we need each other. And to kind of do it not to do it alone, but to do it as a community who can really empower one another. And hopefully this book is not an answers to everyone's questions, but at least it starts conversations that need to have.
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing your personal reflections really on how your faith is being challenged and grown through the process of doing theology community writing this book, but how it continues to develop. I'm feeling really moved by what you both are sharing and inviting us into and consider. Maybe we can talk now just a little bit about your chapter, because it's so rich theologically and yes, heavy, but also really beautiful. I think it's a sign of humility to be questioning something that you've written afterwards and wondering if you've done something, so important and tricky in the Christian tradition as martyrdom. So I'm grateful to hear you articulate that. But I was really struck by your framing in a lot of senses of martyrdom as a communal experience. It's not something that I've encountered before in theological writings. So I'm wondering if you might want to reflect on this a little bit. But you look at the history of martyrdom in the New Testament, in Christian scripture, and then in Christian tradition, and you really you talk about how martyrdom illuminates a need for an aspect of community in discipleship, of this way of following Jesus. And this kind of ties back to what you just said, Sam, about community being both a tool of resistance, and then also a necessity for survival. So how were you drawn to martyrdom in particular, and why talk about it as a communal act? So often martyrs are lifted up as individuals, as heroes in the faith, and their stories are rarely told woven in with one another, though we do certainly have some of those stories in scripture and Christian tradition.
The subject of martyrdom, the subject of suffering and death in general, was something that John and I felt we needed to address in a way that is new. But we also thought not only addressing the reality of death and genocide and suffering, but also how, as you mentioned, we often focus on individuals who are martyrs, like Bonhoeffer, Oscar Romero, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. and so on and so on. And when focusing on those people, we forget actually the meaning of martyrdom and the collective spirit that we need to embody as a martyr church. And what I mean by martyr, I mean by witness. The Greek word for martyrdom and the Arabic word means witness, shahid, martyr. And why does it connect to community? So first, in baptism, when you give witness to Jesus, to believing in Christ, the waters that cleanse you are also the waters that drown you. So you are doing a sort of dying to self and having a new identity. And that process of the new identity is involving someone else baptizing you. You cannot baptize yourself. Even Christ was baptized by John. So already the framing of witnessing to Jesus and belonging to the community, you have to involve another person beyond yourself to engage in that kind of new identity. And the second thing, and I'm going to go back again to Acts, is when you are witnessing to Jesus, you are supposed to be a body with different gifts and different talents, where it's not centered around one or two people or a handful of people, but represents a collective, a holistic community that points towards Jesus of Nazareth. And in that sense, always martyrdom then means that as a community, we should be focusing collectively with one another and not on a handful of people. So already there's a politics of humbleness. There's a politics of centering the collective rather than the selected few. And in that sense, martyrdom has to involve community and has to involve the witnessing to other people. I'm going to take it to the Palestinian Christian context a bit more to kind of flesh out what I'm saying. In our martyrdom, in our witnessing to the West, which is vital and important, we often forget to be a witness to each other, to the fellow Palestinian. And how does our witness to the West be credible if we're not also being witnesses to one another in Palestine? So in the Palestinian Christian context and in invoking the theology of martyrdom, we're calling on not only being a witness to empire, but a witness to one another, to the community, to the faithful. And in that sense, we're all the time grounding, martyrdom all the time calls us and pushes us to one another in love, not only to the Romans, to the oppressors who we need to witness to speak truth to power, but also to the faithful community, to one another. So in that sense, martyrdom is in its essence is about community. It's about that kind of spirit of baptism where someone needs to baptize you. You cannot baptize yourself.
And in that same spirit, also, we oftentimes speak about the declining number of Christians in Palestine, which is a serious problem, absolutely. But that's not our measure of success or what should lead our mission. Our mission is to be witnesses, martyrs to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that means that no matter the numbers that exist in Palestine, that same mission stays, right? Banks measure their success and failure by numbers, not the church. And therefore, when we're mission orientated, we're focusing on what we have to do. Even if we're 10 people, 12 people, 100 people, whatever it is, we need to work together for that mission. And, I think there's something absolutely core to the Eastern and specifically Arab Eastern tradition of Christianity. And that is when you go into a church, especially an Orthodox church, you immediately see loads and loads of icons, loads and loads of figures from the Bible and from the early church and from our tradition. We're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. We are here because of the witnesses that have gone before us, and hopefully we can continue in that tradition and for those to come after us. So there's almost a communal sense that transcends time and space. And this is a deeply Eastern spiritual concept that I think that sometimes we Palestinian Christians can forget, because we too are influenced by coloniality, and that's just the nature of things, and therefore we need to decolonize ourselves. But also people in other contexts completely forget about that sort of core element of our spirituality as Christians, is that we are amongst a cloud of witnesses when we're in church, right? And that's another sort of communal element that is, I think, so important for these times.
Do you think there's a way to live out a gospel witness, to be on a path of discipleship that doesn't engage with martyrdom, that doesn't participate in that kind of witness?
Absolutely not. I think that when you truly follow Christ, you have to carry the cross. And if you follow the footsteps of Jesus, he takes you to the cross, right? If you literally follow him, he takes you to the cross. And I think that many Christians, and we are also, I think, guilty of this at times, is, we've built a theology of success. It's about having a big church, it's having lots of followers, it's having, lots of money, or it's having power or recognition, and it's this type of sort of success gospel. And the gospel of Jesus is not a gospel of success. As James Cone reminds us, it's a gospel of ultimate success through failure. So how can we think about embracing this type of gospel of failure, right? That ultimately gets transformed into success.
And that's the good news, because when the lynching victim is on the tree, powerless, the message of martyrdom, the message of suffering the crucified God, says, I affirm your humanity irrespective of what the powers may do to you. They may lynch you, they may imprison you, they may muzzle you, but there's a power beyond that affirms your humanity. And that's why martyrdom is so central to our faith, and the cross is our symbol. And that's something really important to recognize when we try to follow and discern where God is acting within our realities. Because as we're approaching Advent and we're looking for the star, we're looking for that, for Emmanuel, we can do the mistake and end up in Herod's palace in Jerusalem and not in the manger in Bethlehem. And we have to have that lens of martyrdom in our understanding of where God is operating, because we can get very blurred vision if we start having a lens of success, or a lens of how do we achieve a certain power like the empire, not seeing the witness, the incarnation of God amongst crucified people of today. And that's why martyrdom is a lens, is a spirituality that we can enact on an everyday basis. Yes, our suffering in the most extreme moments come from liberatory praxis, and we may suffer that fate, who knows, and those around us. But martyrdom is the hermeneutic. It is the lens in which we see things on the everyday, in which we understand where power is working, the power of empire and the power of the crucified and ultimately resurrected Christ. And that is the lens of Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene went and mourned and brought the oils to mourn with others the death of Christ. And through that mourning, through that lens that she had of witnessing, she encountered the resurrected Christ. And I think that is something that we really need to take seriously as we frame things in our power analysis, but also how we understand our interventions and where we need to interject as a community who is bearing witness.
And many Christians can easily answer the question of why did Jesus get crucified, right? He got crucified to redeem the world. He died for our sins. But not many people ask how he was killed, right? And he was crucified as a troublemaker, as a rebel, one who questioned and challenged authorities for the sake of building a community of love and elevating and freeing the oppressed. So, and we kind of speak about it in the chapter that in many contexts in the early church, if you had the title Christian, that meant you were automatically were opposed to the Roman Empire. Sadly, today, when people say that they're Christian, we often think that they're actually affiliated with the empire. So how do we truly kind of engage with our Christian identity that at the heart of it is not one of empire? It's not being tempted by that empire that seems comfortable and one that has lots of money and power, but one that is true to the message of Jesus Christ.
Samuel Munayer, John Munayer, I think I could easily talk to you both all day about theology and liberation and the threads that you have communally woven in this book and beyond. But this feels like a good place to leave our conversation today. Thank you both so much for joining us and joining our community at Across the Divide to really invite us more into a lot of these conversations. Have a lot of gratitude for what you've shared today.
Thank you so much for having us and for all the crew behind Across the Divide and the great work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And reach John and I and the other contributors if you have any reflections from the book. And truly, we're here walking and picking olives in the olive groves together. We are one movement. Our liberation is interconnected, and so is our oppression. So we are one movement. So these conversations are essential. These communities and relationships are really essential for our liberation. So I appreciate it. And inshallah, see you in Palestine.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Across the Divide. We are so grateful for your support and interest. The hosts of this podcast are Daniel Bannoura, Jennifer Madrand, and myself, Abir Shhabi. Salim Anfous is our producer. Our theme music is composed by Charlie Rishmawi. To help sustain the work of this podcast, please consider becoming a financial supporter of Across the Divide. Any donation amount makes a difference, and with a donation of as little as $5 a month, you will gain access to exclusive supporter-only content. Go to patreon.com/acrossthedivide to learn more and donate. For any feedback or suggestions, connect with us on Instagram at Across the Divide Podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, stay engaged, and join us again on Across the Divide.